Hi, my name is Kyla Bauer. I spent 5 years in a PhD program trying to understand what is causing adult loneliness. And I just successfully defended my research, and I'm going to share a fraction of my presentation with you, trying to give you enough information to get started so that you yourselves can start participating in these larger conversations that we're having about how do we build our society to be more socially connected. Um, so some of the presentation will be a bit sciencey, like the title of my talk. I found this to be necessary so that people know that I did actual research. But anything that first appears complicated, it's going to get broken down into terms that you can easily relate to. Like this is the simple version of my talk. I'm going to share some background information first. Then I'm going to explain to you how I did my research because I think the techniques that I use can help you understand your own loneliness and start to examine it for yourself in your own communities. So to start off, I have to give thanks to 8 people at my university who provided guidance and support throughout. But to tell you a little bit about myself and my motivations for doing this research, in my career, I've worked directly with community members and stakeholders on population health issues that we struggle to make a dent in for many, many decades since they are from when they are first recognized as public health problems. So, really stubborn issues like climate change, the obesity epidemic, the cost of healthcare. So when I started my PhD program, it was actually right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was really strange to me that during this global tragedy, I actually began to feel a sense of hope because the COVID-19 response was actually the fastest, largest, and most effective public health response that I have witnessed in my professional career. And that was despite all the controversies and disagreements on how the pandemic was handled. And it made me think about how our work in public health may be well designed to address a virus that isn't translating super great to address other kinds of population health issues. So, when a loneliness epidemic in the US was declared in 2023, I thought it was a really good opportunity to think about how do we approach it differently since we know that loneliness is not the same thing as a virus. I consulted with more than 20 experts to get different perspectives to inform my research approach. So let's start with what's typically understood about loneliness. Loneliness is this signal in our bodies that our need for social connection, meaning human relationships, it's not being met. It indicates that the quality of our relationships is different than what we need. So even if we are not objectively isolated from other people, we can still feel like we are alone. It's often measured using this validated survey called the UCLA Loneliness Scale. And this survey captures an overall sense of how much an individual feels they are valued and are part of something larger than themselves. Loneliness, though, is a normal part of human life. It's just that at high and chronic levels, it has a greater impact on mortality risk than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Chronic loneliness can turn into a vicious cycle with severe depression that over a long time leads to objective social isolation. So, people experiencing chronic loneliness describe it as becoming trapped to the point that it shatters their own sense of self, and there tends to be a lot of shame around it. In population studies done across several countries, younger adult age groups tend to experience serious loneliness at higher levels than older age groups. In the US, roughly 20 to 40% of all adults seem to be suffering from it. So in 2023, the US Surgeon General declared a loneliness epidemic and outlined a national strategy to improve social connection in our communities. However, this strategy acknowledges that there are no interventions that are known to be effective. Therapy has been found to have a small impact, but not enough to eliminate severe chronic loneliness. There is also a difficulty in evaluating community interventions because they are usually unique programs for very small groups of people. We don't know if we can actually expand these programs across the US. So, my dissertation is a simple question to really dig deeper into the underlying causes of loneliness so that we can better inform our interventions. When we say that loneliness is a problem with the quality of social connection, Well, what qualities are we talking about? And how is it possible that these qualities could be pervasive across our entire country? So, the biggest challenge to my research was actually this new idea that social connection is now a human basic need in the same way that we think of food or water. But there's no existing information in public health to explain what do we mean by that and how does it change our interventions. So I did what's called an interdisciplinary literature review to find out what do oxygen, water, food, and shelter have in common with social connection that makes them our most critical needs for survival. This is the detailed version of what I found, but I'm going to talk through a simpler version. So we can think of water as both the ocean and a glass of water. And social connection can actually be understood in these different ways. Social connection as an ocean is everything contained within human society: violence in relationships, wars, abuse, crimes, safety, justice, labor, how we divide our labor, what we trade in relationships, how we socially organize, and how we live together. All of it, all of it, the whole thing is social connection. Social connection for you, though, as an individual, is a glass of water. And every glass of water that you have drank in your entire lifetime, is that water safe? Is there enough of it? What else is in that water that helps you to be healthy? So, social connection is about the overall safety, the amount, and the quality of interactions that you have had with other people across your entire life. When evolutionary biologists talk about our dependence on social connection to survive as human beings, they're not only talking about our family and friends, they are talking about our dependence on the societies in which we live that is critical to our survival as a social species. A society is made up of cooperative and interdependent interactions among groups of people who live together. So it can be defined by either geographical boundaries, like the outer boundaries of a city or town, or communication boundaries, which gets a little bit more tricky with things like the internet. It can also be defined by the larger social processes that adhere us to living together, like our shared values within specific areas. So, in public health, we talk about living in a society within what's called the social ecological model. And by organizing our social environment, it becomes easier to understand what is a society made up of. What does that word mean? Relational, it means our close relationships like family and friends, and the places where they happen, like our personal spaces of home. Community means community spaces or organizations where a lot of social interactions are taking place. So think of school as a physical place, and then all of the social networks and interactions that happen at school. Now, societal is where things get tricky because these are social factors that may not necessarily have a physical form. These are the abstract things that kind of tie us together as social groups. Things like our social norms, our values, that influence how we interact with each other in a society. Why do health researchers think that an entire society can directly impact our individual health? And the most up-to-date theory about this comes from environmental health and social epidemiology, and it's called the social exposome model. So it suggests that individuals can be physically exposed to things happening in a society through our direct social interactions with the people we live around or communicate with. So direct social interactions are the actors or people who are involved, the places where social interactions are happening, and their dynamics. What was that interaction like for you? Physical exposure to direct social interactions is believed to be how individuals experience dependence on the societies in which they live. How does physical exposure to direct social interactions get inside our bodies to impact our health? So, social homeostasis is an idea that has actually been around since 1956, and neuroscientists are still updating how it might work in people. So this is the detailed model, but I'm going to talk about a simpler version. So homeostasis, it's a biology term. And it describes all of the processes happening inside our bodies that help maintain balance and stability to keep us alive. So our cells need resources like a certain amount of water in order to function and do their jobs. And our brain actually monitors these needs and can send signals like feeling thirsty to encourage us go find and drink some water. This creates a direct biological pathway for how human survival is dependent on a resource that exists outside of our bodies. If there is a severe disruption to this process, it can cause dysfunction in our bodies that directly develops into disease and mortality risk. So think of severe dehydration and what that and the impact of that on people's bodies. Our brain and nervous system seem to depend on specific kinds of sensory stimulation in order to function properly. What we see, what we hear, what we touch, all of that is experienced in our nervous system and it can be stored in our brains. Specific kinds of sensory information, like hearing the sound of people's voices and language, or being touched, like having your hand held or being hugged, we get that from our relationships with other people, and it can significantly impact our brain development. So, our body experiences stress when we feel lonely, and changes happen in our brain to encourage us to change our behaviors around other people. Remember, it's not deterministic, it's an encouragement. If there is a severe or chronic disruption to this process, neuroscientists are testing if it causes dysfunction that directly develops into severe mental illness. So, I just explained to you, in theory, a pathway for how problems with social connection can directly cause poor health in our bodies as individuals. So when we talk about lonely people having problem with the quality in their relationships, using this theory, what I am talking about are objective and universal qualities that for some reason are not good for the health of our bodies, especially our nervous system. What exactly is going on in society when people feel lonely? So, health researchers have already identified a very long list of risk factors for loneliness. It's just that it's hard to make sense of them and why collectively they are bad for human health. What does being single have to do with childhood trauma or not getting enough support? That all of these can result in loneliness. So, for my dissertation, I examined these qualities further to see, is there a cohesive way to think about them? So for my PhD, I did 3 research projects to examine my research question. I am going to have future videos about each one of them as they get published so that they have the opportunity to go through the peer review process. So I'm going to end there with my introduction. I hope you enjoyed the background of what I shared, and feel free to give me feedback. Thank you so much for your time.